A very good afternoon. I hope you had a wonderful day in the markets, and the markets are just closed right now. So I hope everybody had a very wonderful day in the markets. We have gathered over here on our investing channel. I welcome you all. And right now we have a very interesting guest, and it's an absolute honor to speak with him at right now. We have Manish sir from ICICI Prudential. Manish heads the product communications at ICICI. He has been doing this since the last 10 years. He has over a decade of experience in heading products and actually managing or being the intermediary between the product team and the sales team. So anybody who has any doubts about any mutual funds, you know that Manish is the guy that you guys go to get any sort of clarification on what this fund is about, what type of an investor should actually invest in this fund. And ICICI has now come up with a very new and a very thematic initiative, a very new fund, which is the Rural Opportunities Fund. So we have actually gathered over here to talk about how rural demand is actually driving India's growth story. I remember I read a study a while back which said that rural demand is actually the only pivotal thing that is driving the FMCG growth. So all the FMCG companies, all the revenues, all the profits that you see that are increasing year on year at tremendous rates, at 30% increase, 38% revenue increases, you guys have to thank the rural demand for it. And yeah, that's what we are going to be talking about. So I hand over the stage to Mr. Manish, and he can take it forward from here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. And on behalf of ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund, thank you for giving us an opportunity. Um, so I'll just start and very clearly said that the agenda for today's discussion is one of the NFOs and one of the interesting idea which we have come up with, which is ICICI Prudential Rural Opportunities Fund. And I would like to present few slides on the same, and post that, if time permits, we can have some Q&A sessions. So without taking much of a time, I'll just start with the presentation. And just for your information that the NFO is already opened, and this will get closed on January 23rd. That's the date which you should keep in mind, right? So let's talk about Rural Opportunities Fund. What is the opportunity which is there? And I'll just like to give you some perspective around. So I think first slide which I want to cover here is that I think there's no doubt in anybody's mind that India is a country which is expected to grow very fast, and in terms of whether you're talking about GDP growth or in terms of how the economy is going to shape up. Uh, uh, Organizations which are internationally present, like IMF and all, clearly predicts that India by 2027 would be the third largest GDP market, and it's going to do very well in the coming, let's say, 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. India is expected to be one of the fastest. And with this background, if you have in mind, with this background, I would just like to throw just two numbers in front of you. The first number is that uh, for this kind of a growth, rural is going to play a very big role. And the number which I want to put why rural is going to play such big role for GDP to grow to the next level or India to grow to the next level. The first number which I want to highlight is 64% of India's population still resides in rural areas. Right? And the second number which I want to give it to you, which is, there are a lot of numbers, but just one number which I want to give it to you is 46% of India's GDP contribution comes from rural. So if you keep these two numbers in mind, that 64% of the population resides in rural, and GDP contribution 46% comes from rural. Now, my only point here is that if you believe in India's story, if you believe India is going to grow to the next level, it cannot happen with rural not participating, because you have 64% population and 46. Now, what has happened is that for the last 4 5 years, rural as an economy has been struggling. It's mainly to do with COVID. Post COVID, what has happened is that we have seen a K-shaped recovery. K-shaped means that one side you have seen the urban population or the urban economy doing very well, but the rural population or the rural economy kind of struggling. because of the COVID scarring which has happened across the balance sheet of rural people. But now what we are seeing is that the rural part of the portfolio or rural part of the economy has started to revive. The green shoots are visible. And that's why we are very positive that in the coming years, rural is going to be the baton holder for India's growth. And with these numbers of 64% population, 46% GDP, you cannot ignore rural for very long. That's something which I just wanted to make an opening statement. But I'll focus on few points that why we believe rural is going to be a very big play. It's mainly because of 3 points. One, manufacturing focus of government in India, especially the kind of focus which is there on manufacturing, that's augurs well or that plays out well for rural. I'll explain why. Second thing, the quality of life which is improving in the rural side. That's the second point. I'll expand that point. Third thing, the structural changes which is happening in rural internally without any external. These 3 points, if I highlight for the long term, we believe rural is going to be a great story. If I have to highlight the first point, and I'll just put it very, very simply that when it comes to manufacturing, right, and we have seen countries like China, which is now today called the factory of the global world, that they have taken manufacturing to the next level. And that's what India is also going through a journey. India's journey was slightly different from China. We moved from agriculture to IT services, and we are one of the renowned name in the IT services. But China moved from agriculture to manufacturing. And now what government is doing is that from IT services, we have advanced. Now government wanted to tap in on the manufacturing segment, right? And manufacturing segment, what happens is that it is a labor intensive profession. You need more labor. And since manufacturing, you have to set up big factories, big shops, you need land. So you need land and labor, and that is not easily available, let's say, in a urban side, not in Mumbai or a Chennai or a Tamil Nadu or a Bangalore or Delhi. It's easily available in rural places. So just to give you an example, if you look at the table in front of you, some of the major MNC companies which have come into India, they have set up their shop or they have set up their factories in rural areas. So that's why the prerequisite for manufacturing is land and labor. And that's why the biggest beneficiary of government's push towards manufacturing is going to be rural, what we believe. And that's why we're very positive on first thing that if you believe in India's manufacturing story for the next 5, 10 years, you have to believe on rural economy. That's one. Second thing which we wanted to highlight is the quality of life which is improving in rural, and that's why we are becoming very, very positive on rural theme, and that's why we like this theme at this point of time. Now, what do I mean by quality of life is that quality of life, what I mean by is that let's say if a company if a MNC company want to come and set up a shop or set up a factory in rural area, their prerequisite is that do your rural area has proper roads so that we can transport our goods or products? Do the rural villages have electricity connection so that we can work on our factories? Do rural villages have proper literacy rate so that we can employ people properly? Does people have basic banking accounting services so that we can at least transfer whatever the compensation is to that? So these are basic requirements. And what government has done is that for the last so many years, the Indian government has focused a lot on creating this kind of a quality of life for rural, so that if you clean the house, if I have to put it in a very simple manner, that first you have to clean the house, then only you can welcome somebody else. So government was very cognizant of the fact that first we have to create a good quality of life, and then the manufacturing companies can come to India and say that yes, the ecosystem is there for us to come and set up a shop. So quality of life has been improving in the rural side. If I have to give you very quick examples, like almost 99% of the village today has all-weather roads. In FY09, this was only 58%. So it improved drastically. Today, 100% of the villages are electrified. Almost 75% of the villages have clean waters. Now, the literacy rate in rural has gone up from 50% level to 74%. Today, Wi-Fi connectivity or a mobile connectivity is much better in the rural space. PM Jandan Yojana has ensured that people have access towards banking services. These are just the hygiene factor which was there, which was required for the manufacturing push to happen. And that's why we believe the ecosystem is being created. And now the manufacturing thing can pick up from here. So that's the second point which we like about rural is quality of life is improving and the rural growth can go to the next. Third thing which I want to talk about very briefly is about structural changes which is happening in rural and which is very very positive, right? At a point of time in rural, 80% of the employment was towards rural, but that share has come down to 60% and 40% is towards construction and manufacturing. This is a big positive because construction and manufacturing is almost a 2x or 3x better income kind of a job. So suppose if you get 100 rupees in agriculture, construction, you may get 200, manufacturing, you may get 300. So 2x or 3x. That's why it's a better remunerative job. And that's why the structural change of shifting to industries like construction and manufacturing creates a very good income for the rural side. And then they can do the more of discretionary spending, like apart from the basic roti kapda makan, they can start thinking of buying a refrigerator or a washing machine or a two-wheeler, etc. So that's positive for the rural economy. One more thing which I just want to highlight is per capita income. 2000 is a magical number for per capita income. We normally say globally also any country which crosses 2000, after that the consumption patterns improve drastically because people kind of move away from the basic roti kapda makan and then they started doing the discretionary. If you look at the urban population, that crossed the 2000 per capita in 2011-12, almost 14 years back. And from there, the rural growth was very fast. But in 2024, first time when rural kind of crossed the 2000 number, and that's why this magical number has been touched on the rural side. And we believe this can play a very big role in the consumption improvement on the side. Even women employment, if I have to say, that is improving on the rural side in a big manner. And that again adds to the overall income for the households which is there in the rural side that can also drive the consumption. So these are basic structural changes which we believe why we are positive on rural. So just to brief, manufacturing push, quality of life, structural changes, these three things are making us very, very positive on the rural as a theme for the long. But the next question which comes and people ask is that if it's a structural story, why now? Maybe I can invest after 6 months, maybe I can invest after 1 year, right? So it's a structural story. Anytime we can do. No, but actually there are two triggers which we like immediate, which is happening. And that's why we believe if rural has to be bought, it has to be right now. The theme has to be played right now. Is that two things which is there? One, the election, which has been the state elections, which is happening. If you see, there is a trend that the state elections, the agenda which is happening is that more towards rural focus. Like, for example, some of the welfare schemes which we have seen, like in Maharashtra, we have seen welfare schemes like Ladli Behna. And similarly, there has been 10, 12 states which have declared similar welfare schemes. And now that welfare schemes have constituted almost 1.1% of the GDP. So such welfare schemes, which is focused on the rural side, if that happens, then the rural economy can come out of this number in a much, much faster manner. And that's what we have seen that the welfare schemes, which has been created by the state elections, has helped the rural economy in a much, much manner. And I'll give you a very simple example to relate to this, that if we give, let's say, a 1 lakh rupee to an urban person, a urban individual, the first thing he may do, I'm saying the best case scenario is that he may go and invest in a stock or a mutual fund, but it doesn't come into the economy as a direct consumption. But if you give that 1 lakh to a rural person, the first thing he does is that maybe he'll buy a laptop for the kids for their education. Maybe he'll buy a two-wheeler, maybe he'll buy a cycle or a refrigerator, washing machine, but that gets consumed immediately. And that's why in an economy, whenever government pushes for a welfare scheme on the rural side, the impact is very, very immediate. And that's why we believe this trigger is playing out. And that's why rural has to be played out today. Second thing which we believe is that we are going to see budget in Feb first, and we wanted to have a scheme before budget. That's why the closing date is 23rd, and it will get allotted on 30th of Jan, and 31st it would be open. This is a fund which is strategically placed just before the budget, because if in budget we expect there is going to be a lot of focus on the rural economy, rural development, and that can be very positive for rural oriented companies, and that we can tap those that advantage of rural companies to the rural focused budget, we can play that through this fund, ICICI Prudential Rural Opportunities Fund, and that's why it has to happen. The investment, which for this NFO, we wanted to come with it today, not 3 months or a 6 months or 1 year after that. So it has to happen today. That's why we like this NFO to be coming on this stage. I think lastly, which I just want to talk about is that just next 5 minutes I'll take is on how are we going to structure this portfolio, or how are we going to run this portfolio. Just few directions how we are thinking at this point of time is when we talk about ICICI Prudential Rural Opportunities Fund. The first thing which I want to highlight to everybody is that there is a misconception that when we talk about rural, people think it's all about agriculture. It's only about agriculture. It's only about agri-related things, nothing else. But that's not true, because when we talk about rural, it's a complete economy which we are talking about, right? So when we talk about rural, rural is all about uh, roads being constructed in rural space. Rural is all about people also driving four-wheelers or a two-wheelers. Rural is also about people having insurance plans. Rural is also about people using banking services. Rural is also about using agrochemicals or chemicals. Rural is also about consumption, which includes FMCG and all. Rural is also about people using telecom services. So telecom is a play. Rural is also where villages are getting electricity. So it's also about power play. So I'm saying it's a very, very broad theme. It's not a very, very narrow theme which people normally think about. It's a very broad theme, and if you can see the sectors which have been put in front of you, there's a huge bouquet of products which we can play. So this is a very, very big advantage, that there is a lot of flexibility in the hands of fund manager when we talk about rural, that he can play into various sectors at various point of time. So there is a lot of flexibility to play in this. I think lastly, some of the sectors which we like at this point of time, and where you will see some of a decent exposure in the portfolio, is like sectors like cement. Valuations wise, very, very reasonable. In fact, they have corrected in the last 6 7 months. So you're getting a good valuation, good valuations in this sector. Potential wise, cement looking good, and it's a play on the rural development. Power is something, again, you will see for the last 6 months they have corrected as a sector. Valuations has become much reasonable. Government focus quite a bit on the power side, on electrification of rural. So that's a play. Auto is something which we like in the rural side, because rural income is improving. So people will go for more two-wheelers or more four-wheelers, tractors, etc. So auto is a good play on that. Telecom, I think democratization of mobile phones, which is there, and rural, you have 64% of the population. So telecom is a very, very big play on the rural side. Consumption, like I said, and in fact, consumption is a theme which is where the rural economy has started to come back, looking very, very strong. If you look at some of the commentary of FMCG companies in September month, they very clearly said that rural economy is looking very strong. They're coming out of the woods. In fact, they're doing much, much better than urban. So consumption is also expected to pick up well. Banking is something which we like also in this theme. And lastly, agriculture or agrochemicals kind of a theme also we will be very, very positive in the rural theme in this fund, in this scheme. Right? So that's how the sector. If we have to look at how the portfolio kind of created, these are the sectors which we like at this point of time. And finally, I think I'll just do summarize it. So I'll just summarize the whole talk which I had, is that one thing which we will say is that India is a great growth story. There is absolutely no problem in the structural story of India. And whenever you think about India growing, you cannot ignore the rural population, which is 64% and which contributes almost 46% of the GDP. The growth cannot come without rural. So we believe rural is going to be a big game changer for India's growth story. Clearly, there are structural stories in place for rural, like I said, manufacturing, quality of life, um, manufacturing quality of life, where and structural shift, like people shifting from agriculture to construction, manufacturing. All these are creating positive catalyst for rural growth. And finally, we believe rural is a very good, flexible, broad theme where investors can have a good experience. And lastly, there are short-term triggers like the election where there is welfare schemes happening, and plus budget. Before budget, we expect budget can have very good allocation towards rural development. So this is a good opportunity for everybody to play on the rural before these triggers kind of completely materialize. It's a good opportunity. And lastly, I'll just say ICICI Prudential Mutual Fund has been known for coming up with right ideas at the right time. And our endeavor has been to create very good experience for investors in the long term. So we believe even this theme, which we have brought at this juncture, can create a good experience for investors. With that, I'll just pause over here and thank you. Thank you.
Done, sir. That was very, very insightful. I actually have a couple of questions on this. Firstly, like you said, like rural demand has been increasing since the past 5, 6 years, and now, especially after COVID, we see a huge increase in that. So if the graph was going like this, suddenly after COVID, it has gone like this. I think COVID and just like the entire experience that people are now prioritizing experience, even not only just in urban centers but also in rural centers, is a big contributing factor to that. I actually wanted to ask, as a country, India is a very aspirational country in general. अगर हमारे पास बाइक है, हमें गाड़ी चाहिए, गाड़ी है तो हमें 4 गाड़ियां और चाहिए, या फिर उसके बाद हमें सुपर कार चाहिए. So that is what we are as a country. And we also see that with the current wedding season happening. So I recently read like some 6 lakh crore rupees are been pumped into the GDP just because of this one wedding season. I wanted to ask how much of that thinking or how much of that psyche is actually driving the rural consumption pattern or just rural growth in general.
Absolutely. I think that's you've just hit the nail on the head, and that's actually what's happening in India. If I have to talk in India, what's happening on the consumption side? See, there is two big advantage, and both starts with two P's. We have heard about three P's, four P's, five P's, but I'm going to talk about two P's of consumption, which is the main thing which is driving the whole India consumption to the next level. The first is penetration, and second is premiumization. Two piece, right? So India is a country where most of the goods and services, if you look at it, is under penetrated. Like for example, if I have to tell you, roughly we will have out of our overall population, 8-9% people only have air conditioning, compared to let's say a China, which would be let's say a 35-40%. If you go to US, people will have almost 80-85% of the population have ACs. Like in India, if you look at automobiles, India or four wheelers, if I have to say, people would be or hardly would be 3-4% who have four wheelers. When you go to China, it would be as high as let's say a 20-25%. And again, if you go to European countries, it would be as high as 80-85%. I can give you n number of examples like refrigerator, etc. But the main point is that India is a country which is underpenetrated in many goods, in many white goods, services, etc. And that's a big advantage because you have scope for growth for the companies which are there in India. There you can see the next 5 years, 10 years growth, etc. That's one point. And second, in India, you are seeing premiumization happening. Now, you have a market where penetration is low and also premiumization. That's a very solid combo for any companies to come and set up in a shop in India. I'll give you the example for premiumization. In FY 2015, in financial year 2015, if you look at if there are 100 cars sold in India, roughly 15 were SUVs. Today, you go out in the road and you will see Celtos of the world, or the Carons of the world, or the Harriers of the world, or the Nexons of the world, or XUV 700 of the world. That out of 100 cars which are sold, 50 are SUVs. And SUV are not cheap vehicles, right? It's not a simple hatchback, etc. So that's
Correct.
premiumization, if I have to. If you look at even very simple example, the growth in simple bar soaps and the growth in body gels, very simple examples. The growth in bath gel is much higher. The growth of normal chai, green tea is much higher. Very, very simple example I'm giving you for that. Even the growth of deodorant
Hmm.
compared to a normal freshener kind of a thing, deodorant is much higher. So if you look at the consumption pattern, also premiumization increasing even on the auto side or simple goods also. So that's a very solid combo for India, that the domestic consumption underpenetrated and premiumization. That's why we believe consumption is a very, very strong theme for India. And if the rural economy comes back to complete shape,
Mhm.
uh, then this can be a great play. The consumption can be a big.
Understood, understood. You said about bars, so that brings me to another interesting point. We have been, say, categorizing rural growth or FMCG growth partly because of the rural demand. लोग कहते भी कि यार एफएमसीजी का धंधा उस वजह से ही चलता है क्योंकि वो छोटे छोटे शैम्पू के पैकेट्स बिक रहे हैं गाँव के अंदर वैसे what we have now started saying, you rightly said about premiumization as well. Recently, only lighting last week, only a big FMCG giant HUL purchased Minimalist. They were actually seed investors in
Ah,
Minimalist.
absolutely. Yeah. You're correct.
Bought in the brand. Minimalist is the same thing. It's just a well-positioned product and it's a premium product. So,
Correct.
and we see this pattern with a lot of FMCG brand, not just to name HUL. We see this pattern with a lot of FMCG brand that they are premiumizing. Maggie has now introduced, or say a Nestle has now introduced something called as a Korean noodle. Whereas because people don't want to consume Maggie noodles now, they want to move ahead. They want to consume what's in the trend right now. So I think that is a big factor that has actually,
Absolutely. Like if you're
said.
giving the example of HUL, I may take 1 minute just to give a very interesting example. We have heard a talk on from one of the directors of the company, and they were saying that when they came to India during, let's say, or when they were planning their complete product line in 1990s, they said when they launched the small 1 rupee shampoo, which you are talking about, 1 rupee shampoo or a 2 rupee shampoo pouch and all, which they used to say, they were thinking that first they thought, let's put it on the board who are the biggest competitor of this 1 rupee or a 2 rupee sachet shampoos. So you
Hmm.
won't believe the first competitor was soap. People never
Correct.
used to use shampoo. Imagine that kind of a situation we were in, that people used to use the soap for cleaning their hair, etc. And all. From there, you moved to the 1 rupee, 2 rupee shampoo, and now the premiumization has gone to the next level where you are talking about the minimalist brand and also exactly the point that we are growing in terms of premiumization. We are growing into a penetration, and that's very positive for the consumption. Yes.
Correct, correct. Sir, one question about the fund in general. So, a lot of rural growth has been attributed to, say, FMCG. Because we keep on saying that FMCG is a big player in rural growth, and both of their relations are sort of hand in hand. Like, this is rural, this is FMCG, so that is how they are complementing each other. I want to ask how much of this fund is actually focused towards FMCG? What are the other sectors uh, that this fund focuses on? Does it heavily rely on FMCG only, or there are other sectors involved in this fund as well?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point, and I want to clarify that rural is not only about consumption, and that's what the people think about is that okay, rural people only consume the FMCG goods and all, or otherwise they will do the normal kheti badi. That's all. Kheti badi karo, or then you do just the consumption. Actually, वैसा नहीं होता है. That is not the case. Like I said, in rural you also have good roads. You have people consuming two-wheelers, you have people consuming four-wheeler vehicles, you have people consuming insurance, you have people using banking services, people using mobile phones, people using Netflix, YouTube, of the world.
Correct.
And I can go on and on. Power, telecom, all that examples which is there in front of you. We are talking about rural economy. We are not talking about rural consumption. When you talk about rural consumption, that's when the FMCG comes into picture. Here, this is a rural opportunities. We are हम लोग यहाँ पे पूरा रूरल इकोनॉमी में जो डेवलपमेंट हो रहा है उसके बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. तो इसीलिए इसमें डेफिनेटली आपका एफएमसीजी और कंजम्पशन इज गोइंग टू बी अ पार्ट, बट देयर इज आल्सो वेरी बिग पार्ट ऑफ प्ले व्हिच इज ऑन द डेवलपमेंट. So yes, you will see FMCG consumption, which is being a part, which will have a good amount of share. But apart from that, the bigger share will also go towards development, like cement companies, banking companies, insurance companies, agrochemicals, power, telecom, all that will also come into picture. So this is a much broader play on the rural development, which we want to play on this.
Correct. Correct. Awesome, sir. Uh, I'll just check if there are any more questions that we have received from our audience as well. I'll take up a few questions as well. Uh, Okay, yes, there's a very interesting question. Ki how does it align or is it different from the benchmark? And also, the audience would like to know what is the benchmark for this fund that ICICI has taken.
तो एक्चुअली इसका बेंचमार्क जो है वी कॉल इट एज निफ्टी रूरल इंडेक्स इज द बेंचमार्क फॉर दिस फंड एंड आई टॉक अबाउट द बेंचमार्क इट्स अ वेरी वेल डाइवर्सिफाइड सेक्टर और इंडेक्स it has 11 sectors it has 11 sectors and 75 stocks so only that will give you a idea कि कितना एक broad diversified play आपको मिल रहा है
Correct.
and so that's going to be the benchmark but we will also have like to have those sectors, those places where we are more comfortable. So we are not going to stick very closely or very similar to benchmark. We may take some active calls where the sectors which we like, वहां पे हम लोग शायद थोड़ा ज्यादा पोजीशन लेंगे और कुछ सेक्टर्स जो हमें नहीं पसंद होगा we will reduce the exposure. So we would be taking active calls in this fund. And but Nifty Rural Index is the benchmark.
Okay, sir. Okay. I think that's it, sir. We'll wrap the session over here today. Any concluding thoughts, anything that you would like to conclude with, end this session with?
Yes, I think एक चीज बहुत clearly मैं बोलना चाहूंगा is that see what happens is that in investment world we believe that uh, buying is a very important decision but people spend a lot of time on buying. People don't spend too much time on sizing or when to sell, etc. So
Hmm.
what happens sometimes? The idea is that you buy a product, but maybe a possibility that you don't size it properly. That opportunity कि
Hmm.
आपने अच्छा sizing नहीं किया और वो जो theme आपका 4 times 5 times हो गया, but you didn't size it properly. So I'm saying sometimes this kind of an opportunities come, and we believe rural is an opportunity which is at the cusp of turnaround, at the cusp of turnaround. And imagine this is a train which is there at the station, so you can get into the train very comfortably, rather than chasing those trains which are running at a 120, 130 kilometer, and you're trying to get in it would be very challenging. So this is a theme which we believe is just in the cusp of turnaround, and there
Correct.
is good growth cycle for the next 3 5 years. So we believe we can create a good experience for investor. So I would request to participate in this theme and create good experience with us. Thank you.
Understood. Sir, also just one last question. Since you are
Sure,
mentioning
sure.
about since how rural is at the cusp of say a very good run and the train is just getting started. One question over here is ki should an investor, a normal retail investor, should they consider the lump sum route for this or should they go for the SIP route for this? Now again the thing goes कि यार अगर आप lump sum के अंदर invest करते हो, you get that massive say you get a seat in the train. तो अगर ट्रेन वो 0 से अगर 100 जा रही है तो आपको वो पूरा एक्सपीरियंस करने में मिलता है वेर एज ऑब्वियसली इफ यू गो फॉर एन SIP रूट तो अगर ट्रेन के बीच में अगर कोई कहीं ट्रैफिक में रुक गई एंड आपको अच्छे से एवरेज आउट करने मिल जाता है आपका पोजीशन सो एज समबडी बिकॉज सिंस द फंड इज नाउ जस्ट ओपन राइट नाउ व्हाट वुड यू रिकमेंड फॉर अ इन्वेस्टर
We would recommend lump sum. And this is lump sum because I'm saying this is a theme like we discussed that this is a theme which has not done well for the last 4 5 years. There is good valuations which is there for this segment. It has not in a frothy zone where we will say, oh, it's a frothy zone or it's expensive, so go staggered. This is a space where the valuations is comfort is there. So you can put the lump sum money and can enjoy the journey. That's why we are saying you don't have to do a staggered way. Like honestly, we are saying staggered way for mid and small cap where the valuations has moved higher. But here we are saying that this is a theme which is not in a frothy zone. So you can do a lump sum allocation over here is what we will.
Understood. Understood. Okay, sir. Very insightful. And
Thank
any
you.
investor who wants to invest in the ICICI Prudential Rural Opportunities Fund can do it via Dhan, can do it via any other platform as well, can do it via any other offline channel as well. All right, guys.